Hello, here's a video request about 410 and the Sack of Rome by Gaul. I'll try to make this video go by kind of quick. I haven't had anything to eat yet today, and I'm hungry, and it's 7:01 in the p.m. on, Wednesday. So, I tried to do this video yesterday, but I got 21 minutes in and had to stop because my bathroom wasn't clean enough. But now I can go. So, Alaric and the Sack of Rome 410. That is a doozy of a request. Thank you for giving it to me. Feel free to give me lots of requests like that. From Respectafarian. I think it should be required that everybody who has a YouTube channel and talks do a video about this. Because it pertains to what's going on now. Has to do with the empire and the barbarians coming in, and maybe they're going to drag down the empire and what's wrong, all the parallels between the current day and wrong. So 410, that's when Rome fell. That's the crash of Rome. The Roman Empire, when you look at it on Wikipedia and all the books, officially went down in the year 476 when they had a boy emperor named Augustus Romulus, the very first king of Rome and the very first emperor of Rome. And he was, I guess, officially the Roman emperor in Ravenna, but they didn't have much territory, and pretty much all of Italy was controlled by the Goths at that point. And the Goths said, this is stupid. Let's just end it all. I'll take your land, and I'll retire you off to the countryside. So they took his signet ring and mailed it back to the Eastern Roman Empire and said, "There's no more Roman Empire." And the Eastern guy didn't say anything. It's like, okay. So it's just an uneventful, boring story, but the mortal death blow of Rome and what actually killed Roman culture was in 410. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the actual 410, what happened in 410, and then I'll expand it out and talk about the wider story. So, in 410, the Gothic army had crossed the Danube, and they had their own free reign over Italy. There was no army left, and they just went right into Rome, and were gonna sack it. They were, because they didn't like the Romans, and it was the first time that there had been a foreign kingdom taking over the inside of Rome. So they went to, he was very reasonable before that, but I'll talk about that later. Reasonable with Rome, kind of high. So what they did is they went to Ostia, the port, where they got all of their grain from Egypt, and did a blockade of Rome until they had walls. So they were under siege, and they, used up their stores, and then they all starved to death. And so all the dead bodies rotted and made people sick. So they finally had to open the gates to the Goths. There was a story of how some of the rich people shared some of their, stores. The widow of Theodosius. But then they let the Goths in, and the Goths came in and sacked Rome. They were there, I think it was a week or something, and they didn't do a wide-scale massacre. Only one Roman senator was recorded as being killed by the Goths, but they did orderly go into the houses of the Romans and take their stuff, and take the Romans as slaves. That's the That's the ancient tradition whenever you go into a Sac city, especially if you're the barbarians, you go and you take slaves. But they didn't really want to kind of go in and take over the city of Rome. They didn't like Rome. They were barbarians. They had their own culture. And they had enough slaves as it was. The structure set up, or the desire to like have all these Roman slaves, and they weren't going to kill all of them. So they sold them to their friends, to the other free Romans from the countryside for a cheap price, kind of going through the motions. And they freed all of the slaves inside of Rome, and that caused a massacre. They freed 40,000 slaves, and the slaves who didn't like their masters killed their masters, and there were thousands of people who got killed in that. They demanded the payoff from Rome for them to leave was 4,000 pounds of gold, 20,000 pounds of silver, 3,000 silk shirts, and 3,000 other type of fancy garment. And then they would also, went into the houses and just took the individual soldiers whatever they want. So, but they weren't They weren't total barbarians, though. And then they left, and Rome, like as far as the infrastructure, there was a lot of stuff that kind of disappeared, and they think maybe that's when they sacked Rome. The statue of Nero, maybe that was torn down when they attacked Rome. Also, there was a row of ancient sepulchres that hold the bodies of the ancient emperors and kings, and they sacked that, took all the bodies out, and all the riches that were inside. They totally defiled Rome. They hated Rome. And then they left and set up their own kingdom, like in the north of Italy or something. And I think the Roman Empire, survived another 66 years after that. So let's talk about the wider story of the sack of Rome and Alaric and how that actually happened. And look at it from all of the different angles, and especially, the enlightened angle, where people really who knew. All the historians, when they talk about the fall of Rome, it's not like, those dirty bastard barbarians, they somehow got a really big army and took over our Rome. They blame it on Rome. And so let me talk about a little bit of the problems of the Empire of Rome, and then we'll talk about the events leading up to the sack of Rome, and showing how, the Roman command structure was screwed up and basically needed to get an overhaul. So you could think of the sack of Rome from different angles. Like one of them, barbarians come in, but you could also look at it as a revolution from their own people, and also maybe like a revolution from the people in charge too. So the Roman world. There was a section, I prepared for this video by listening to all the chapters about it in Edward Gibbon's book. It's on my website, volume 3. There was maybe like a half hour worth of reading. There is a book by Augustine of Hippo, who wrote a book called City of God that's like 1,800 pages long. And he wrote it in the year 410, and he was talking about the fall of the Empire of Rome and all the reasons and stuff. I read that book like years ago, and he actually died in a siege. But then after the sack of Rome, then the Vandals came in and took over northern Italy and besieged his city, and that's when he starved to death. He's the most prolific Roman writer and Christian writer. So, but I don't remember what he said exactly about that. In another video to prepare for this, I listened to a documentary about the sack of Rome. So, the Roman world, there was a section in the book of Edward Gibbon and he was describing the Roman world and just how ridiculous it was. The Roman world is basically, if you wanted to compare it to nowadays, it was basically a situation where, like nowadays you would have all these people getting residual money, passive income, um, all of the money getting funneled to the wealthy and the wealthy families, and so there's all these people sitting around with way too much money and nothing to do. They don't even know what to do with it, and then all these other people have nothing, that's eventually caused a revolution. So that's basically where Rome was, only on steroids. And you can. I'm actually in the process right now of illustrating visually the wealth discrepancy and how rich people were. They had a law, Lex Lugia or whatever, that they passed. This was when they were a republic, so that law had probably been abolished by now, and it was even worse. But they had to pass a law that said private land can only be 500 jugera, which is about 1.36 square kilometers, which is like almost like it's like a full-on city. It's like 4 kilometers around. It's the whole size of Boulder. Okay, so that was somebody's estate. Okay, like if you're picturing going up to Beverly Hills and every person's house, that's how big somebody's house would be. So then they would have a town. It was like some rich dude in a big castle at their town next door, and they owned the town. But they literally, in Roman times, like in Dark Ages, it was like that. You'd have your castle on the hill, and then the town below, and the guy in the castle actually did, I think, own the town. Yeah, so it was actually coming from until the Black Plague and they lost their power. It legally was like that, but that's how that they inherited that from Rome. You could compare that to somebody in their big estate. So anyway, he's describing just these rich people. I think your average patrician got 4,000 pounds of gold a year from his renting out, all of his land and everything that he owned. So they would basically own entire cities. But the difference between the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, and Rome is like Rome, they actually did literally own the entire city. Like in the Middle Ages, the guy couldn't be like, okay, we're going to go on a trip to see my friend in the next town over, and he'd take the whole city. He didn't have that kind of power. But in Rome, they did. He was describing whenever the household would move, like go on a trip somewhere, it was like an army. They'd have the whole order of the different ministers of this cookery and this, that, and the other, and they, like a train down the road, and all the people, plebeians would look at it and be like, this is so stupid. They would have big banquets at their house, and they would hire notaries to come to record their banquet, because when you like their version of the newspaper, you would open up the newspaper and it would say, oh, page 3, so and so had a party, and so you go, okay, he had a party. Wow, how many guests were there? Who was there? And they weighed the fish. How heavy were the fish? What type of fish did they use? And then what course of food did they have? And all this stuff. Because they developed extravagant lifestyle to an art, kind of like the French from the late 1700s when Louis the 16th up there in Versailles, they would have all their traditions that they would do and all their different courses and meals, and the 10,000 people who lived in that building wouldn't have anything to do. They were all the lords from the different parts of France were brought there so that he could have control over them. And then he could have control over their proxies, so it was just a money sucker. Marie Antoinette created her own town, like a whole town, just for fun. Versailles is huge. And they had all kinds, there's stories you could talk about Versailles, just all the ways that they, like people had to watch her give birth and all this weird stuff. So that was kind of like Rome. They would stuff ducks to make them extra fat, and they had all kinds of culinary science that got lost. We don't have there's only one novel that's left of Rome. Um, and what else? He was describing other stuff. Yeah, and they were just decadent. They had lost touch with what matters. They would have slaves who would, if a slave murdered somebody, you would just slap him on the wrist. And but if he was late in giving you your hot water, then he would get 30 lashes. And and as far as the actual Romans themselves go, the citizens, the plebeians in the city, Rome was basically like a giant, one of these estates that just sucked in money. The city of Rome was kind of like that. It was, people were given, they lost records of exactly how much people were given, but like I think in the time of, just before the sacking of Rome, each family householder was given 3 pounds of bread every single day. And so they probably had it worked out. And before that, it was even more. Before that, they would give maybe, I don't know, every person 3 pounds of bread a day, but they would also give you wine. Everybody was given free wine in Rome. And free oil for their food and for their lamps. There's this mountain called Mount Testaccio in Rome. It's this big-ass mountain. And it's made out of the glass, the pottery jars that they imported from the wine. So the empire was just this mechanism to funnel all of the wealth of the world into this one city for people to not work. For 1.2 million people to just sit there and get up, go to their gladiatorial combats and their chariot races and hang out in their baths and go home. And another activity that they did was watch debates. So the concept of Rome as this place where, like the capital of the world, where people could go and all the different parts of the world could go and commingle, and to give them a tax to be able to do that. I think that could be an idea that everybody in the world could sign off on. Could support, but it creates this definitely a potential for problems when it becomes too greedy, decadent. People, instead of, he was saying in the book, people, instead of listening to reading their books of their ancient philosophers and history, the rich people who have their own libraries, they just shut off their libraries and it was gathering cobwebs. And when the people would go and watch their shows and their presentations, instead of watching people have intelligent debates or giving educational speeches, they would watch pantomimes of telling stories from the past. But it was just comedy and low intelligence, just pantomimes were really popular, I guess, up until the 500s. So. I think pantomimes are great if you're trying to show in the past, show people who don't necessarily speak your language, because languages were much smaller, but to not be able to graduate past that, with people who can understand you and have intelligent debates and presentations, it just rots. And people who visit Rome would lose respect for Rome. Rome had respect for a long time, and people would visit Rome and they would be amazed by all of the infrastructure and education of the people, and they would go home to their home domain and not have a problem with giving a tax to Rome. But he was saying that people would go to Rome in the decadent years, in the later years, and they would get their traditional, salutation from their politician of Rome and give a show of the bath and stuff, but then they would go back and try to establish a relationship, and they'd just be shunned, and because people people were only focused on competing with each other for wealth and not having intelligent conversations with people from abroad. And it was so it just, and the leaders of the Roman Empire were making really stupid decisions too. So the magnificence of Rome was waning. It's Rome is the only empire that I can think of that has such um, a an even growth and decline. It grew really slowly. Livy has maybe 1,000 pages where he's just describing the politics of an area the size of Boulder County, a normal county, 40 kilometers across, um, and and then they were an empire for a long time, and then they were a kingdom losing territory very gradually for a very long time. So it's very simple to just look at the first half of Rome when they were growing, when they were successful, and then the second half when they were unsuccessful, and what are the differences. And it's clear that in the second half, like in the first half, they were a democracy that balanced power and wealth, and then the second end gave responsibility to normal people. The normal people were very capable, and in the second half, it was had lots of wealth discrepancy. It was just a kingdom. There was no democracy, republic, and the people were just receiving free bread to watch chariot races, And so, if you want to design a healthy culture, then what you would want to do is superimpose the culture of democracy and self-reliance onto a pre-existing culture of rules and traditions and social stratification. I think that's been going on forever, and it's so natural that we need to keep the social stratification. We just need to make sure that it's a meritocracy and not something that you're born into, but also something that, and it's in a situation. The big thing is that we live in a society that doesn't waste. When you invent things, the technology is supposed to make life easier. It's not supposed to make us use all of the extra money that we have to incarcerate people forever for no reason. And start wars with people. So basically, what happened with Rome is they lost their respect from everybody. They lost their self-respect. They lost their respect from people in the Roman Empire. They lost their respect from the barbarians around the empire, and even the Huns even invaded the empire. So it just people. It's kind of like giving somebody a scholarship to go to college, and instead of studying, they just partied and played video games the whole time. And then the money ran out, and they graduate college, and they can't get a job because all the people who didn't go to college but were studying are more qualified than you, so you have to work for them. He was describing what happened in France. France was among the most loyal Romans because it was taken over by Julius Caesar, which was at the beginning of the Roman Empire, in the BCs, and that the Gauls came in, or the Franks came in, and they couldn't, the Romans couldn't organize and defend themselves, so they were just, and because they were too busy, fighting with each other. Another way that you could look at Rome, the fall of the Empire of Rome, instead of barbarians come over and taking over them, they basically just transferred themselves. Like what I was saying before, each person has their own domain. Well, they stopped wanting to pay taxes, and so then they just paid on their own domain. So their domain, and then they had to watch out for their neighbors. So their villas turned into from villas into castles. But so when the Franks invaded, because they couldn't defend themselves, and another reason that barbarians today is when there's not enough population from a plague. And so you could kind of trace the very beginnings of this, the germs of it, to Commodus. There was a plague during the time of Antoninus, the last of the 5 good emperors in the Golden Age of Rome, which reduced the population, and so they had to fight off the barbarians trying to come in, and Commodus screwed that up, and he just gave up and went home and partied. So anyway, so so people were just, as the barbarians coming in, and Rome can't defend themselves. That's people basically turning to the barbarians, because they know that if they give their taxes or to the local magistrate, he'll spend it corruptly, or it'll go to Rome, which will spend it corruptly, or they can't even use it at all. So. But the actual death blow, which led to the sacking of Rome, was one battle called the Battle of Adrianople, and I think it was in like the year 393 or something like that. So it was like a good few years before the actual sacking. It kind of came over. It took like a little generation or whatever. But what happened was the Huns came in and kicked all of the Goths' asses. And by then the Goths weren't quite so barbarian, It wasn't like the Roman Empire of 390 wasn't the same empire as 400 years before. That's a long time. 400 years before, it was a very sharp divide on the Danube and the Rhine between the barbarians. Barbarians were, Tacitus writes a book called Germania about the Germans, and the Germans didn't even have a town. They had no towns. They would just build these like stick huts and stay there for a year, and then they'd move to the next valley and build stick huts. And so fast forward 400 years later, Goths, yes, they all had towns, they had walls, and the Germans, just like the Romans did. They had learned Roman battle tactics. They didn't fight like with their shirts completely off, running through the field screaming. Now they were just like Romans. But the most important thing that shows their similarity is they had the same religion. All of the Goths were Christians. They were Arian Christians. And the Roman Empire was officially Christian. They had one generation beforehand. The emperor of Rome during the time of the sack of Rome in 410 was Honorius, who was the son of Theodosius, which was the emperor who officially, the emperor who officially made it Christian was Constantine, but Theodosius physically made it Christian. He physically tore down all of the ancient temples and replaced them with Christian temples, and that was the very last emperor who had control over the entire empire. So they did it just in the nick of time. but they were following the trend of the civilized world. So they were kind of following. You could say maybe they were even following the barbarians. Everybody was becoming Christian. So instead of it being the Roman civilized world and the barbarian world, it was kind of like the Roman kingdom, oppressive Roman kingdom, and then on the other side of the river, the barbarian or the Gothic kingdoms, so it was like two countries, civilized countries next to each other. So, but every once in a while, the Goths, they were less civilized, and less, organized. They had less resources to draw on, so they would, when they get invaded, they would run into Rome, and Rome would give them area to settle and make them Romans. And so the barbarians came in, the real barbarians, the Mongols, the Huns came in, kicked all the Goths' asses, and they ran into Rome. And they were easy. They could get into Rome real easy at that time when they got attacked, because the Danube was frozen solid. They just walked right across. And the Romans, and here's where you can talk about how Rome failed. The Romans didn't defend the border. They just had one garrison there that got wiped out or ran. And then the army didn't come and kill them all. The army just came and was like, okay, well, now you're here, I guess you're Romans. but they didn't deal decisively with them. They just treated them poorly to hope that maybe they would leave. And so they were making the Goths sell their children for food, and they took all their other swords away. But a lot of them hid their swords, and so they ended up they weren't given the king of the Goths, or the leader of the Goths, was Alaric, but he was, if I remember correctly from the documentary, he was actually a Roman. He was a Roman of Gothic background, and he was just leading the Goths. And he said, "Look, just make me a Roman lord or whatever, or a Roman general, and then I'll be the God in charge of the Gothic army for the Roman Empire, and then you let us settle in a place." So they let him do that, but they weren't giving him their food. They weren't treating him like Romans and giving him places to pasture. They were basically trying to like starve them out or something. They're basically being indecisive and stupid. So the Romans were like, "Okay, fine, we'll have a battle with you and kill all of you, pesky Goths." And the Romans actually pushed for this. The Roman citizens pushed for it, and because they didn't like the Goths being around them, because their culture wasn't similar enough. They were too snooty, and so they had to. There were two armies. There was Valens and Valentinian, and they were supposed to unite and then kill the Goths. But they screwed up. They weren't professional. They went and did a scout, but they didn't do a thorough scout. They just looked at it from one angle and then they left. And it was when they said they counted the horses to find out how big the army was. But what they didn't realize is that all of the horses were out to pasture over the hillside. And so the Gothic army was much larger. And so they were lazy. And then when they came, they had a competition between the two armies. One army wanted to win the war all by himself so he could have his own triumph and not share with the other. And the other said, no, wait, and we'll have the army together. So the first guy, I think the son, or maybe it was the father and son, Valentinian and Valens, went and had his battle by himself with what he thought was a small army. It was a big army, and they got wiped out. They got boxed in and cut to pieces. And then they went and I think they had another battle. That was the Battle of Adrianople. And then they wiped out the other army. So now Roman Empire did not have an army because they had already been on the wane. Back in the height of Roman Empire, they had 30 legions. But now, they had like a couple and then they lost all of it. So now it was just the Roman Empire. They had to just rest, all of the provinces of Greece, Egypt giving all of their grain to the city of Rome, and all of this economic structure they had was now just on faith, on tradition. And so the Goths realized it, and so now the Goths have an actual kingdom. Like now it's no more, okay, you want to give us permission to be a state, or not even be a state, be inside of one of your states. Now they're like, okay, we're a kingdom now. We have a bigger army than you, like we could take over the whole country, empire if we wanted to. And so, but Alaric, he still wanted to just settle and become part of the Roman Empire. So he wanted to have a meeting. And this is after Rome already lost their armies. He wanted to have a meeting with Honorius, who was the emperor, in Ravenna. And Honorius refused to even see him because he was just a Goth, because Honorius thought maybe he could muster up another army. And so they were like, all right. And he just stormed Rome. And as he came in, they got bigger an army. It was like Spartacus. They would free slaves and get their army bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they went and destroyed the city of Rome, or they stripped the wealth of the city of Rome. The death blow, and then that was led to the death blow of the whole Western Empire. So. So the moral of the story is, you can't, if you're going to have a world empire that's going to survive and a city that's going to survive, you have to stay true to the qualities that made it popular in the first place. You have to treat those as institutions unto themselves that have importance that is actually written into their documents, their constitution. So I think, I've said this before, but the first thing that they would is move the capital from Rome to another city. Rome was the capital of the world, and they spent all this money building up the infrastructure of the city of Rome. And so what you want to do is protect that. You don't want to have a wasteful society. A wasteful society is a society that spends all their money building things and building up things that don't last. Like you don't want to build a big ass house that's beautiful and then 5 years later, because you're so rich, tear the house down and build another house because you just want to have a different looking house. And that's what Rome had been doing forever. They would, like the Emperor Nero, he built his house. He tore down the whole neighborhood, built his house, and then they didn't like Nero, so they tore down Nero's house and built the Colosseum. And instead of just building something and then hoping it lasted, that's what was the successful part of Rome, was building things that lasted. And it's like the gods of Rome, or the genius of Rome, the magic of Rome, that thing that gives its authority and to the whole world and respect to the whole world, love from the whole world, support from the whole world, and so that's the beauty of it. The beauty of the buildings and the culture and the ability to bring all the world together. Anybody from any corner of the world could go there, convene, and debate about the religion or something, and then you'd have their republic that would debate. With the 300 senators in there. Kind of representing the whole, because they didn't have internet, so they would have as big of the people talking about something, making decisions as possible, and then, he would go and have their big meeting with his group. They actually scientifically explain it. The Greeks, how many people can be heard clearly in an area. You just look at the Roman Forum; it's about that size, and you can fit 6,000 people there. That's how many people were at Plato's sermons. So, and they would have people vote in one day in ancient Greece, so they had it figured out. But and that kind of should inspire us to really take it to the next level now that we have internet. But what they did was they just put their values not on education and on communication, but on competing with each other for how wealthy you are, because it's intellectually easy. And what other? I'm trying to think of other crazy rich people traditions that they had. Gambling and playing cards was a way to get rich and be a star and make a lot of money. Kind of like that guy Dan Balzeran. It was Dan Balzeran for real back then, but it would obviously only be within the wealthy classes because they had so much money. So you could be a wealthy person playing with the other wealthies and get a bunch of money playing cards and make shitloads of money. They also had, it was a really organized society. They could have done a lot with it. Some of the richest people were chariot racers. They were like as rich as modern day superstars. Actors were super rich and wealthy. So you're getting into a society that is costs a lot to maintain. When you have these rich people who then spend their money having slaves do this and that for them, and all these other people sitting around doing nothing. People around the world are going to start scratching their heads and going, okay, this place, maybe we shouldn't be giving these people so much tax money, So I think the moral of the story is, I think we should rebuild Rome, turn it back into a place of convening for all the different world religions and thoughts and creeds and races, and use the money from the Catholic Church to bring it to build up the actual buildings of Rome and keep it. Because if they had have kept Rome as the capital and they had have kept it democratic and a republic, then people would have not wanted to. It would have been sacrosanct. Nobody would have wanted to hurt it. No. The Goths would have been settled, and you had to respect the Goths as people and meet with them. Honorius was just this rich kid who just spent money. He didn't want to deal with the difficult decision making and stuff. So, so you have to make it a meritocracy. But if you're going to make it a meritocracy, it has to be a society that supports the children of the wealthy from the past, so that they would support it. And so, if you're going to support, that means you would have to support everybody, because there's always new people coming up. So it's like adding new people to the wealthy. So the wealthy class has to be defined as a class of people that doesn't suck wealth. It's the wealthy class of the educated class, and so they would get the universal income to basically be educated. That's where my bike school comes in. You get paid $50,000 a year from the oligarchs to ride your bike all day long and then talk about your history book that you listen to that day. So so yeah, I mean, it ties into the current day a lot because people are just trying to decide how we should look at different cultures and if they, in fact, if there's a saturation point where people from third world countries coming to America and Europe could actually tip the balance and actually degrade our culture overall and cause us to actually have to adjust our laws to make them less free to accommodate for all of these other people coming in. Like making laws, like if the Muslims, so many Muslims in Europe, make law that women are allowed to have short skirts because the Muslims have to say you can't draw Muhammad, or and then they would lose their sight of respect of European culture because there's too much wealth discrepancy, and so people would identify with the Muslims as the poor, and lose. People would just watch programmed people, talking heads who are paid to become popular, and nobody does YouTube videos, and because nobody knows anything, because nobody wants to read history, because we're all too busy watching sitcoms. It's basically a replay of Rome. Okay, if you used ancient Rome, the template of ancient Rome, plugged it into the current day, you could basically, and then if maybe you could extrapolate it out into how it would fall. You could tell a story like, oh yeah, everybody's just sitting around with their thumbs up their asses watching TV, watching lucha libre, the wrestlers and the football. It's like past life memory. We're just doing what we were accustomed to before, going to the Coliseum and just being observed, just being watchers and consumers. If you get a YouTube comment, it's from somebody who doesn't even have a video, and everybody's anonymous. Nobody has an opinion. Nobody has a website. Yet everybody has the time because the money is given to them. Or a lot of people have the extra time from universal income or from like passive income. They would have the time to make a website to share what they know, but they don't because they spend all of their time doing the passive stuff. And so everybody does that. So that creates a void in society where you could have some kind of like an autocratic dictatorship like China or Korea's, and then they make laws where you're actually not allowed to upload videos, and then nobody cares because nobody did them anyway. You know what I mean? And then see, shit could really hit the fan if we start having resource problems, population, too much population, not enough resources. So then we have to start making laws to make us more efficient, but to force us to be more efficient because we didn't do it voluntarily when we could. We didn't stop driving our cars and just ride our bikes all day long and eat vegetables in our house, out of the cans, and then spend all of our extra time sharing what we know on the internet. Instead of that, we just, if we got money, we would just go out to the restaurant or hire somebody to, like a Mexican who didn't have anything to go, clean your house when you could have done it. Pay extra fees for permits or whatever. I don't know, just getting thrown in jail for smoking weed, just all kinds of things to just spend money and like everybody thinking they have to have their own house. It's like if you grew up in your parents' house and your parents have a 5-bedroom house, why not just live with your parents until they die, and then you inherit their house instead of having to have your own house and then your own 5 kids. So I mean, there are parts of the world that you need more people to keep the population going, and there are parts of the world where there's too many people, and so, but you have to protect your culture if an inferior culture that's not successful is trying to come in the people, because they are going to bring their culture with them. I don't think I spent 7 years in South America, 5 years in Chile, and I did teaching English in Argentina and Chile, and I don't think those countries would, like, if the whole world, like if it was Argentinians and Chileans and Africans, I don't think the world would survive, because it would be like Rome. People would just care about money and then there would be this us then, and then there would be a war, and then everybody would die because they'd use up all the resources, and then, I mean, thank God that we have America. I think Americans who can figure stuff out and communicate because we have a culture of communication. Those places don't. Those places have a YouTube video. It's like something super processed, and they're a superstar, and then so that everybody else watches them, and then so nobody else in the country even has a video. It's like TV thrown onto, superimposed onto the internet when that's not what the technology says. The technology allows for everybody to be able to have their own show. So yeah, it's so similar. Ancient Rome, a world of the culture of the passive observer. And that's what these alt-right people are also talking about, the racists, like Stephen Molyneux. He loves to use Rome as an example. They would only have to work 3 to 5 days a year. And is that what we want for us? And then people will just leech and then use. So yeah, if everybody's worried about leeching and using and losing the respect of everybody, you have to keep the respect of people like some third worlder who has nothing. You have to have them look up to you, but want to be like you, and if you were to visit them, they would want to help you out and be your friend. So you have to live a life that doesn't waste, and that's what I'm saying. Bike school. You just get up, ride your bike all day long, listen to your audiobook, and then do your video. And you're like multitasking and using every second of your day, and not this bullshit that I had to do in high school and college, where you're just sitting there drooling watching some asshole babble because you're just their fucking backfill. So yeah, I mean, it could answer so many questions from today. Like the problem with Muslims. They're like, Muslims suck. Why? Because just look at the Middle East. There's no Christians there, and that's where Christianity was born. They killed all the Christians. Well, yeah, they're primitive and stuff, but they also kill each other. You need to look at oh shit, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this? Oh yeah. You have to look at the history of everything, like the history of Muslims. Muslims have plenty of good history. It's just that you should separate their religion from their culture. Their culture is fucked because they're a bunch of hillbillies from the desert. Islam was the thing that actually helped them, and it's the best thing about them, not the worst. Like back in the day, the Crusaders went to try to kill all of them, and they didn't. And then when they kicked the crusade, they killed everybody in Jerusalem. And then when the Crusaders were kicked out, nobody was killed. They were just kicked out and sent back to Europe. And the Muslims in that time were more educated. They had more scientific knowledge, everything. The Crusaders went back to Europe, learning more things. They learned more things from the Middle East than the Middle Eastern ones from the Europeans. I mean, those days, Europeans were barbarians when they showered once every few weeks. Middle Eastern ones were dressed in silken robes and could read. So. But the most important thing that I like to think about is in the actual birth of Islam with Muhammad. People like to go, oh yeah, Muhammad was a child molester. Muhammad was liked old ladies. Khadijah, his wife, was 15 years older than him. Don't just try to figure out little negative things. Try to focus on that. Look at the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was still going at the time of Muhammad. It was the year 630. And the Western Roman Empire had been taken over by the Goths and Vandals, Lombards. But the Eastern Roman Empire was still strong. That was Theodosius, Justinian and Theodora. They were in the 600s, around the same time. And those guys were freaking monsters. Both of them were the most despicable human beings that ever lived. If you were to make a movie about them, there's a book called The Secret History of Justinian by Procopius. It was a book written about by Justinian by a historian who knew him. It's on my website. And it's like 600 pages of him just telling stories about just everything under the sun. They were your quintessential evil king and queen. He gets a good rap because people like to go, oh, I love my Justinian Theodosia, because like my mom says that, and even my roommate, because he had a war and he took over the Western Roman Empire for a while, and they had the whole Roman Empire for a little bit. But that was just a war for popularity. He was just a money wasting. The Nicomedian riots almost got him ousted because he was so bad that he ended up being able to survive, and he slaughtered 30,000 people. And no, like that's where iconoclasm comes in. Iconoclasm is when people just physically destroy statues because people would feel guilty. There was this in the fall of Rome, the year 410. There was this woman who was a royal woman. She was the daughter of Honorius, I think, and she was taken captive by one of the Vandals or the Goths. But then she married the Goth and had 5 babies with him, and she was going to be happy. And the Goth wanted to called himself the son-in-law of Honorius. He wanted to be part of the Roman Empire. But then the Goths there was a coup in the Gothic army, and he was killed. And so he went and killed all of his kids. So he killed all of Honorius's grandkids. And then, but then he got killed in turn 7 days later. Oh shit! I forgot where I was going with this. Oh shit. Okay. Anyway, I totally forgot where I was going with this. Yeah, well, the Muslims weren't that bad. In the time of Theodosius and Honorius, they were more civilized than, my point is, they were more civilized than the actual Romans. The actual Romans were psycho killers who just gobble up money. Oh yeah, that's when I started talking about the iconoclasm. And so this woman, she was like, look, she wrote her book. I don't know, a historian wrote it. I read this and didn't. She's like, when it's her dying days, she's like, look, I never did anything wrong. I was always tried to communicate with everybody. I was nicest to the poor people and everything. I just lost power. But one thing that she did was she was giving away her wealth, and because she recognized the whole wealth discrepancy problem. She would have been one of these rich people going, yeah, there's too much wealth discrepancy. So she was giving away her wealth and her statues, this kind of stuff. And that's kind of like what iconoclasm is. They're just giving away, but instead of giving their statues to the barbarians, they just destroy them because they become symbols of too much wealth. But now you're destroying something of history. There were when the Crusaders came in the year 1100, 1200, they actually went into Constantinople and took a statue that had been in existence since the year 400 BC, and they melted it down for its gold. So people did that all the time, and that's what people are doing in the Middle East now. The jihadists, the ISIS going in and destroying the ancient temples from thousands of years ago. That's iconoclasm. That's people going in, but that's what people. Then the sentiment from the year 1200, the people who did it was they were against wealth discrepancy. It was a symbol of wealth discrepancy, and so that's why Muhammad said, "Don't ever draw a picture of me," because he was basically saying, "Don't ever make a statue of me, because you'll have to tear it down, because you're not trying to make me the lord of the manor." Like Edward Gibbon was saying that they would make these giant statues, and then they would gild it with gold. And then the other guy his neighbor, the other rich guy, would have to make a bigger statue and gild it with gold. So they'd spend all their money making statues. And then, of course, he would die, and his son would have to have a statue, right? And so it's just spending all this money and wealth for nothing, And that's back in the days when you'd have to build it by hand. Like it was a big deal to make a statue, So people equated civilization with silken robes and warm baths and slaves massaging you and fans above you. And that is what civilization is, but we have it now with machines, right? So you have to keep the culture of being economically efficient, where you don't have people working for other people, just like how it was in the past. But at the same time, you utilize all the technology that is given to you. You utilize your light bulbs and your internet. But that's not what we're doing. We're not utilizing the internet. Nobody has internet videos. Nobody's sharing what they know about the world. They're just watching. And then they're doing some troll comments from a channel that has no information. Okay? So, I can't make any friends on the internet. I do videos every day. I talk about everything, but nobody will ever comment on any of my videos because if you comment, you would have to be anonymous, and nobody wants to be anonymous because they all know that that's the coward's way. But then if you comment and you show who you are, that means I might comment on you, and that puts you on the spot. And so now you're going to have to do a video or do a comment? You know what I mean? Nobody wants to participate. And so then they come up with these excuses like, oh, it's because I'm busy. I'm in survival mode. I have to work. Okay, well, what about the people who don't have to work? Or what about the people who, when they're winding down, they watch 6 hours of TV? Why instead of winding down with 6 hours of TV, why don't wind down with talking? Like, that's how I would wind down. I mean, talking is the most relaxing thing that I could ever do. If I wasn't working on my website all the time like a slave, addicted to my website, I would be addicted to doing videos on YouTube. Okay, and it's easy as fuck. I've been telling my mom was like, should I do podcasts? And I was telling my mom, you just have to. And I was actually telling my fiance the other day, it's easy as pie to do videos every day. These people who do videos every day, and he's like super prolific people. Like there's this guy, Simon Whistler from Facts 10. I found out about him a little bit. He's got like 5 different channels, and he comes out with a video every day on those channels, and they're really good. And people might be like, how the fuck do you do that? Maybe he doesn't do it by himself. But the thing is, all you do is get into a rhythm. You find a niche, you find a rhythm. You do that rhythm every day. You do the same thing every day, and then it's just like second nature. You don't have to be smart to do those kinds of videos. You just write a script. You align your photos, and boom, you're there. And so why does somebody do videos like that everybody could do? They get 1 million subscribers, and then nobody else does a video at all. Well, that's a sign. That's a sign of potential autocratic society that will just gobble up all the power, and then that's like a kingdom. And then there's going to have to be a revolution because they just gobble it up. They put their values in the wrong place because they only pay attention to people on their economic level. Those are the only people they look at are humans. Everybody below them is invisible, and that's what Edward Gibbon was saying. You know, the rich people would go into they would trample down the roads of Rome at full speed, full gallop, 20 miles an hour, kicking up dust, knocking stuff in people's faces, and a huge line of their followers. They would go into the baths and they would yell and kick and like push people into the wall at the bath and just not pay attention to the plebeians, you know, and then go home and there was and you know they'd only pay attention to the pomp and the first level appearance of everything. And as soon as Edward Gibbon was saying, that when they'd have power at parties, the last person they would want to invite would be the scholar. The first person they wanted to invite would be the funny pantomime. So, yeah, that's the most fascinating part of literature I've ever read. That part where Edward Gibbon describes that. I want to read. I'd love it if everybody talked about it because that's the crux of society. You know, people can go, well, how does society die? Is it from too much of barbarians coming in and then destroying your civilization? You know, or is it us destroying our own civilization by only fighting each other for money? You know, and so you have to go back to the basics of what made your country great. You know, like America, our individual freedoms and our ability to make laws that protect normal people and then the ability to follow through with those laws. You know, and so, you know, as far as immigration, my opinion on immigration is, yeah, you should make laws to support them. So I think we should build a wall because we can. I've seen the slabs. It's like my little Google Earth things. It's lying. They just throw these metal slabs up. And then you throw the slabs up, and then you can do it by law, you know? And you can kick out the people who aren't here. Because my idea about these people from third world is I think we have too many of them. I don't like how they come here and they never learn English. When I go to Mexico, and everybody, freaking American who goes to Mexico, within 4 months they're fluent in Spanish and they're talking everything in Spanish. So why the fuck are the Mexicans coming in here, living here forever, and not learning English? I mean, I don't really know. I don't know exactly how many of them are not learning English, but you hear stories of, you know. But the thing is, it's always been like that. If you go to Europe, New York from the 1670s, you have the Dutch, you know, with their Dutch ovens over here, speaking Dutch, German speaking German. In Boulder, back in the late 1800s, there were certain areas in Boulder where they would siphon all the people from the other countries. The Germans would go to the German house, you know, People would go to certain ethnic groups. The black people lived in a certain area, so it's natural. Um, but you just have to know that dividing line for when society starts to crumble. Like if Brownsville, Texas, all of a sudden has a gang shootout of Mexicans and a bunch of Americans die, then ratchet up and go, okay, that's America. You build a wall, you kick out all the illegals, and you say fuck you to any of these like non-nuanced SJW people who can't think more than a layer deep, and just want to be like, no. But I don't know if there's. I watch Young Turks, and they're full on for the immigrants, but sometimes they're not totally. They don't see both sides of the situation. But yeah, I think the main problem is if you're going to blame the immigrants, or you're going to blame the system, and I think you should always try to blame the system. That's where democracy really hurts you, is when you just allow people to make their own decisions, because then they make it off of their emotions and they become racist. And you actually have to be forced by law to not be racist. And so, but you have to know, but you also have to be strong enough to know, the right laws to have, and not to just follow the mass. If everybody says, one thing that's like, let all the Muslims in, what, we have to be humanitarian. It's like, no, wait, hang on, you have to protect your own culture too. So, but that's where the communication comes in. Because it's all about, mutual respect. If those people in the Middle East could talk to you and see you eye to eye, they probably wouldn't want to kill you. But they'd have to do the videos first, so, But you can't just go in and make them do it. You have to fortify your culture, and then you have to show them by example, but you can't show them by example if you allow them to destroy your culture. So I mean, sometimes in the back of my mind, I'm kind of happy Trump won, to be honest, because he's doing all these strong, like what Mike Pence said, he's strong. He's actually kicking them out, making us follow the law. Because that's the thing that makes this the difference between the third world country and the first world country. Anyway, they don't follow laws. I got mugged, punched in the face, and mugged on my bike when I was in Chile by a bunch of kids. I went to the cops, and they're like, "We don't go to that neighborhood. What the hell are you doing there?" Like they basically become like no-fly zones, no-go zones. So we can't make America a no-go zone, because we get too many uneducated people. Because then that'll just make people more racist. They'll be like, "Oh, it's genetic. It must be genetic." So basically, what you learn from the fall of Rome is that you need to just make sure your values are in the right place. Your values are in the same place as they were when Rome was growing. When Rome was growing and it was a republic, they were a citizen army. They didn't even have a just conscripted army until Gaius Marius, or until the 100s, the O's BC, like Sulla, like 60, 70 BC, I think. Maybe it was 160 BC. Yeah, Marius, 160, when they had their first army. But they were kicking everybody's ass before they even had an army. They just would divide the army based on the economic structures, and the rich people would have more gear. And they just went in and fight. And so if all these lazy-ass Romans had been doing bike school, instead of watching pantomimes and chariot races, if they were doing bike races themselves and doing the boxing and the wrestling themselves, and then they were philosophizing themselves on stage instead of watching stupid pantomimes, being comedic, they would have, when the Goth army came, if they were outnumbered, if the Goth army was outnumbered by citizen Romans, it was what, 1 million people? All they had to do was go grab like the Swiss, go grab their arms out of their closet and meet them in the field and beat the shit out of them, But it was a different society. It was different people, like us, Like, how pathetic would that be? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what if, in the next generation, all the kids are fat and out of shape playing video games, and they don't know anything because they're all talking about what he said, she has said, or the new silly, stupid thing that this guy did, and then everybody's going to talk about that, and then so nobody's got, they're so tired. Nobody's got energy at the end of the day to read what people were saying in all the other time periods in history, Like, whenever you see a time period go by, like the sack of Rome, and you're living there in Rome, this is something that's real, and it happened, and it'll always be there, It's like how the Romans would put the masks of their deceased up on the wall, And then now, of course, that turned into the statues, which got unwieldy. But people like to, we take photos, you like to record the past. If you forget what happened in the past and you let the culture dissolve, then you're back down with the animals again. So there's just so many lessons to learn from the sack of Rome. You have to remember, you have to protect, build things to last, buildings to last. Don't change the capital. Like keep it protected. Protect your home and the home of everybody. Protect the individual. Don't have too much wealth discrepancy. Follow the law. Have common sense. Don't punish somebody for not bringing your hot water too late, and then not punish them at all if they kill somebody. Like with weed. Like you can get thrown in jail the rest of your life for accidentally smoking a joint, but then you fucking kill somebody, and like you get a technicality or whatever, and you're off, or you rip off the country millions of dollars or whatever. So so just think of yourself, but you have to be your own. You have to be your own, kingdom unto yourself, and then be proud of create a label of your country you live in, and say that that's the country, and then be proud of that. Like I'm an American. Americans are free. Americans are brave. Americans are educated. So that's America. Go America. So yeah, the sack of Rome. That opens up lots of doors. Oh my God, 106. I hope this renders. Okay, peace out.